Marine Gunnery Sergeant Sarah Chun stood at attention in Colonel Bradley's office, her dress blues perfectly pressed and her service ribbons catching the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the leather scent of old military manuals that lined the colonel's shelves. She had requested this meeting 3 weeks ago, and finally, her chance had arrived. "Sergeant Chun," Colonel Bradley said without looking up from the paperwork scattered across his mahogany desk. His thick fingers drummed against the wood as he read through what appeared to be training schedules. "I understand you want to use the advanced marksmanship range, the one we reserve for our special operations teams." Sarah kept her eyes forward, focusing on a small crack in the wall behind the colonel's head. "Yes, sir. I believe my qualifications warrant the opportunity to train with precision equipment." Colonel Bradley finally looked up, his weathered face showing the kind of skepticism that Sarah had grown accustomed to throughout her 12-year military career. At 32, she had already earned more marksmanship awards than most Marines saw in their entire service, but she knew her slight frame and quiet demeanor often led people to underestimate her capabilities. "Sergeant, that range is designed for Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and Force Recon Marines. These are operators who need every advantage they can get in hostile territory." He leaned back in his leather chair, which creaked under his weight. "What makes you think you belong in that company?" Sarah had prepared for this question. She reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, placing it carefully on the colonel's desk. "My qualification scores from the past 5 years, sir. I've consistently scored expert marksman with every weapon system I've been trained on. Last month, I achieved a perfect score on the advanced rifle course." The colonel glanced at the paper, but didn't pick it up. Instead, he stood and walked to the window overlooking the main parade ground where young Marines were conducting their daily physical training. The sound of their synchronized running chants drifted up to the second-floor office. "Chun, I'm sure you're a competent shooter," he said, emphasizing the word competent in a way that made it sound like an insult. "But that range requires authorization from Special Operations Command. It's not a place for regular Marines to play around with expensive equipment." The dismissive tone stung, but Sarah maintained her military bearing. She had faced this kind of attitude before, from drill instructors who thought she was too small for the Marines to fellow service members who assumed her Asian heritage meant she was only good with computers. Each time, she had let her performance speak for itself. "Sir, with respect, I'm not asking to play around. I'm requesting the opportunity to train at a level that matches my demonstrated abilities." She kept her voice steady and professional. "I believe I can contribute to the base's overall marksmanship standards." Colonel Bradley turned back from the window, his expression showing mild annoyance. "Contribute? Sergeant, those SEALs have been training since before you enlisted. They're the best of the best, handpicked from thousands of candidates. They don't need a Marine instructor, especially not one who—" He paused, his eyes taking in her small stature. "Look, I'm sure you mean well, but let's be realistic about capabilities here." The unfinished sentence hung in the air like smoke. Sarah understood exactly what he meant, and it wasn't the first time someone had questioned her abilities based on her appearance. At 5 feet 4 inches and barely meeting the minimum weight requirements for her height class, she had heard every variation of doubt throughout her career. "I understand your concerns, sir," Sarah replied, though inside, she felt the familiar fire that had driven her to excel in every challenge the Marines had thrown at her. "However, I respectfully request you review my complete service record before making a final decision." Colonel Bradley returned to his desk and picked up her qualification sheet, scanning it more carefully this time. His eyebrows rose slightly as he read through the scores, but his expression quickly returned to skepticism. "These are impressive numbers on paper, Chun, but the advanced range isn't about hitting targets on a control course. It's about precision under pressure, with equipment that costs more than most people's cars." He set the paper down and leaned forward. "Those SEALs train for missions where a single shot can mean the difference between success and failure, between their teammates coming home or not." Sarah nodded respectfully. "I understand the stakes, sir. That's exactly why I want to train at that level. Excellence should be the standard, not the exception. The colonel's phone buzzed, and he glanced at the display before looking back at Sarah. I'll tell you what, Sergeant. There's a qualification exercise scheduled for next Friday. Some of our SEAL team will be running precision drills on the advanced range. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. If you really think you belong there, why don't you observe? See what real special operations marksmanship looks like. Sarah sensed the challenge in his voice, the assumption that seeing elite operators in action would humble her, and her persistence. I would welcome that opportunity, sir. Good. Report to Range 7 at 0800 hours. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez will be running the exercise. Colonel Bradley picked up his pen, clearly signaling the meeting was over. Maybe this will give you some perspective on where you actually fit in the military hierarchy. As Sarah prepared to leave, the colonel added one final comment that would stick with her for the rest of the week. Oh, and Chun, try not to get in the way. These men have real work to do. Walking back to her barracks, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of determination and frustration that had fueled her throughout her military career. The afternoon sun beat down on the concrete walkways as Marines hurried between buildings, preparing for evening chow. She thought about the upcoming observation session and wondered if Colonel Bradley really intended it to be just that, observation. That evening, Sarah sat in her small quarters, cleaning her personal rifle with the methodical precision that had become second nature over the years. Her roommate, Corporal Martinez, was at the base library studying for her sergeant promotion exam, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and the familiar smell of gun oil and metal. She thought about her journey to this point, from a shy teenager in San Francisco who had never held a firearm to a Marine who could put rounds through the same hole at distances that amazed her instructors. The transformation hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. In a military culture that often valued size and intimidation, she had learned that precision and consistency could be just as powerful. Her phone buzzed with a text from her younger brother back home. "How's the Marine life treating you?" She smiled and typed back a simple response, about to get interesting. As she prepared for bed, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She wouldn't just observe next Friday's exercise. She would come prepared for anything Colonel Bradley might throw at her. If he wanted to see where she fit in the military hierarchy, she would show him exactly where that was, at the top of any marksmanship competition, regardless of who else was competing. The base grew quiet except for the distant sound of aircraft returning from night training missions. Sarah fell asleep thinking about precision, about proving doubters wrong, and about the opportunity that awaited her on Range 7. She had no way of knowing that Colonel Bradley was already planning something more than simple observation, or that by next Friday evening, the entire base would be talking about what happened when assumptions met reality on the advanced marksmanship range. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp desert air that made every sound carry farther than usual. Sarah Chun arrived at Range 7 30 minutes early, carrying her personal gear bag and wearing her standard combat utilities. The advanced marksmanship facility was unlike anything else on the base. A sprawling complex of precision shooting lanes, electronic target systems, and equipment that most Marines only read about in technical manuals. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez was already setting up when Sarah approached. He was a compact man with graying temples and hands that moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent decades working with precision weapons. When he saw Sarah walking toward the range, his expression shifted from concentration to mild confusion. "You lost, Marine?" Rodriguez called out, not unkindly, but with the assumption that she had taken a wrong turn somewhere. "Gunnery Sergeant Chun, Chief. Colonel Bradley authorized me to observe today's training exercise." Sarah handed him the printed authorization she had picked up from the colonel's office that morning. Rodriguez read the paper twice, then looked at Sarah again with new interest. "Observe, huh?" He folded the authorization and handed it back. "Well, you picked an interesting day. We've got 6 of our best shooters coming in for quarterly qualification. These guys just got back from deployment, so they're sharp. As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching vehicles echoed across the range. 3 black SUVs pulled up to the facility, disgorging a group of men who looked exactly like what most people imagine when they thought of Navy SEALs. Tall, muscular, and carrying themselves with the quiet confidence that came from knowing they were among the military's elite. The lead operator was a lieutenant named Walker, whose biceps strained against his uniform sleeves and whose handshake could probably crack walnuts. Behind him came 5 other SEALs, each one looking like they had stepped out of a recruitment poster. They moved with synchronized precision, unloading gear bags and checking equipment with the kind of attention to detail that kept them alive in hostile territory. "Chief," Walker nodded to Rodriguez, then noticed Sarah standing nearby. "We have an audience today." "Colonel's orders," Rodriguez replied diplomatically. "Gunnery Sergeant Shun is here to observe." Sarah caught the look that passed between the SEALs, a mixture of amusement and mild annoyance that their training had been turned into a spectacle. She understood their perspective. These men dealt with life and death situations regularly, and having someone watch them like a tourist attraction probably felt insulting. The morning's qualification course was designed to test every aspect of precision marksmanship. Targets at 200, 400, 600, and 800 meters, with varying wind conditions and time constraints. The weapons were top-of-the-line precision rifles with advanced optics that cost more than most people's annual salary. Each shot was electronically recorded and analyzed for accuracy, consistency, and speed. Sarah positioned herself at the observation area, but she could feel the weight of skeptical glances from the SEALs as they prepared their equipment. One of them, a tall redhead named Johnson, made a comment just loud enough for her to hear. "Hope she brought popcorn." The first series of shots began, and Sarah had to admit the SEALs were impressive. Their precision was remarkable, their consistency excellent, and their confidence absolute. Walker put 5 rounds through a 2-inch circle at 400 meters, while Johnson managed similar precision at 600 meters. The electronic scoring system announced each shot's exact placement, and the results were consistently in the expert range. After the first hour, Chief Rodriguez approached Sarah with what appeared to be casual conversation. "What do you think of the show, Gunny?" "Very impressive," Sarah replied honestly. "Their fundamentals are solid, and they work well under pressure." Rodriguez nodded, then asked the question that Sarah sensed had been building since her arrival. "Colonel Bradley mentioned you might want to try a few shots yourself. Just to get a feel for the equipment." The invitation hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah could see the SEALs had overheard the conversation, and their attention was now focused entirely on her response. She realized this had never been intended as simple observation. Colonel Bradley had set up a demonstration, expecting her to embarrass herself in front of the base's elite operators. "I'd appreciate that opportunity, Chief," Sarah replied calmly, though her heart rate increased noticeably. Walker laughed, not cruelly, but with the confidence of someone who had never been outshot by anyone outside special operations. "What's your weapon preference, Gunny? We've got everything from basic sniper systems to the latest precision platforms." Sarah surveyed the available rifles, knowing that her choice would send a message about her seriousness. She selected a weapon system she was familiar with but had never fired with such advanced optics, a platform that would test her adaptability as much as her fundamental skills. "Ambitious choice," Johnson commented, watching her inspect the rifle with professional interest. "That's got a different trigger pull than standard Marine weapons." Sarah nodded, taking a few minutes to familiarize herself with the weapon's balance and characteristics. The SEALs watched with the kind of attention they usually reserved for threat assessment, curious to see how she would handle equipment designed for their level of training. The range grew quiet except for the distant hum of electronic target systems and the occasional aircraft passing overhead. Sarah took her position at the 400-meter line, the same distance where Walker had just demonstrated his expertise. Through the high-powered scope, the target looked close enough to touch, but she knew that precision at this level required more than just good eyesight. Her first shot broke the silence with a sharp crack that echoed across the desert landscape. The electronic scoring system announced the result. Center ring, scoring a perfect 10. The SEALs' conversation died away as they focused on the target display. Lucky shot, someone muttered, though without much conviction. Sarah's second shot followed 10 seconds later, placed so close to the first that the electronic system had difficulty distinguishing between the two holes. The third shot grouped even tighter, creating what marksmen called a cloverleaf pattern, 3 shots touching each other in the target center. The range had grown completely silent except for the wind rustling through the nearby sagebrush. Chief Rodriguez checked the electronic scoring system twice, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Walker stepped up beside him to verify the results, his expression shifting from casual interest to focused attention. "Want to try 600 meters?" Rodriguez asked, his voice carrying a note of professional respect that hadn't been there earlier. Sarah moved to the longer distance without comment, aware that every person on the range was now watching her with complete attention. The 600-meter target required adjustments for wind drift and bullet drop that tested not just shooting skill, but understanding of ballistics and environmental factors. Her first shot at the extended distance struck dead center. The second shot enlarged the hole slightly, and the third shot created a group that measured less than 1 inch, performance that matched or exceeded what the SEALs had achieved with the same equipment. Johnson walked over to the spotting scope to verify what the electronic system was reporting. When he looked up, his expression had changed from skeptical amusement to genuine surprise. "That's some solid shooting, Gunny." But Sarah wasn't finished. Something about the situation, about being underestimated and dismissed, had awakened the same determination that had carried her through Marine Corps training when everyone expected her to fail. She looked at the 800-meter target, a distance that challenged even experienced special operations shooters. "Mind if I try the long line?" she asked Chief Rodriguez. The 800-meter target was barely visible to the naked eye, a small speck against the desert backdrop. At that distance, factors like humidity, temperature, and wind speed became critical variables that could turn a perfect shot into a complete miss. Even with the advanced optics, it required not just skill, but also intuitive understanding of how bullets behaved in flight. Sarah took her time with the calculations, adjusting the scope for distance, and making minor corrections for the crosswind that had picked up as the morning progressed. She was aware of the SEALs gathering behind her, no longer casual observers, but students studying a masterwork. Her first shot at 800 meters struck the target's 9 ring, excellent shooting by any standard. The second shot moved into the 10 ring, and Sarah made a small adjustment before taking the final shot. When the electronic system announced another 10-ring hit with a group measurement that made several of the SEALs whistle in appreciation, Sarah finally stood up from the shooting position. The silence stretched for several seconds before Walker broke it with a slow clap that the other SEALs joined. "Outstanding shooting, Gunnery Sergeant. Where did you train?" "Paris Island, Quantico, and about 12 years of practice," Sarah replied simply. Chief Rodriguez was studying the electronic records of her shooting, shaking his head in amazement. "Gunny, I've been running this range for 8 years, and I've never seen anyone shoot groups like that on their first time with this equipment." The compliment meant more coming from Rodriguez than it would have from almost anyone else. As the range's chief instructor, he had trained some of the military's best marksmen and seen thousands of shooters attempt to qualify on the advanced systems. Johnson approached Sarah as she began cleaning the rifle she had used. "Any chance you'd be interested in some friendly competition? We've got a team match next month against Army Special Forces." Before Sarah could answer, the sound of an approaching vehicle caught everyone's attention. Colonel Bradley's staff car pulled up to the range, and the colonel himself stepped out with the confident stride of someone expecting to find his assumptions confirmed. His expression shifted notably when he saw Sarah standing among the SEALs, holding a precision rifle and being treated with obvious respect by operators who rarely showed deference to anyone outside their community. "How did the observation go, Sergeant Chun?" Colonel Bradley asked, his tone suggesting he expected to hear about her being properly humbled by the experience. Chief Rodriguez stepped forward before Sarah could answer. Sir, the gunnery sergeant just shot the best 800-meter group I've seen in 2 years. These SEALs want to recruit her for their competition team. The colonel's expression went through several changes as he processed this information. Sarah could see him trying to reconcile what he was hearing with his preconceptions about her abilities and place in the military hierarchy. Is that so? He said finally, looking at the electronic scoring records that Rodriguez handed him. The numbers didn't lie, and they told a story that Colonel Bradley clearly hadn't expected to hear when he authorized what he thought would be a humbling demonstration. Colonel Bradley stared at the electronic scoring display for a long moment, his fingers drumming against his leg in the same pattern Sarah had noticed during their first meeting. The numbers on the screen told a story he clearly hadn't expected. Groups measuring less than 1 inch at 600 meters, expert-level precision at 800 meters, and consistency that rivaled the best shooters on the base. Well, he said finally, his voice carrying a note of reluctant respect, it appears I may have misjudged your capabilities, Sergeant Shun. Sarah maintained her military bearing, though inside she felt a mixture of satisfaction and professional pride. Around them, the SEALs continued packing their equipment, but she could sense they were listening to every word of the conversation. Lieutenant Walker stepped forward, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine enthusiasm. Colonel, with respect, Gunnery Sergeant Shun just demonstrated some of the finest marksmanship I've seen from anyone, special operations or otherwise. We'd be honored to have her train with our unit. The colonel's eyebrows rose at this endorsement from one of the base's elite operators. You're saying she performed at your level? Sir, she exceeded our performance, Walker replied without hesitation. Her 800-meter group was tighter than anything we shot today, and she did it with equipment she'd never used before. Chief Rodriguez approached with a printed record of the morning's shooting. Colonel, these are the official scores. Gunnery Sergeant Chin's average across all distances puts her in the top 5% of shooters who have used this range. Colonel Bradley took the paper and studied it carefully. Sarah watched his expression change as the reality of the situation settled in. The demonstration he had arranged to humble her had instead showcased abilities that impressed even the military's elite operators. I owe you an apology, Gunnery Sergeant, the colonel said, his voice carrying genuine respect for the first time since Sarah had known him. I made assumptions based on factors that clearly have nothing to do with your professional competence. The admission carried weight beyond just marksmanship. In acknowledging his misjudgment, Colonel Bradley was recognizing a pattern of assumptions that went far beyond shooting ability. Sarah appreciated his honesty, knowing how difficult it could be for senior officers to admit they had been wrong. Thank you, sir. I understand why my request seemed unusual. Johnson, who had been quietly observing the exchange, stepped forward with a suggestion that surprised everyone. Colonel, what if we made this a regular training opportunity? Cross-training between units could benefit everyone. The idea hung in the air as Colonel Bradley considered its implications. Sarah realized this moment represented more than just her own vindication. It was an opportunity to change how the base approached excellence and training opportunities. You know what? That's not a bad idea, the colonel said slowly. Rodriguez, what would it take to set up a monthly inter-unit marksmanship training session? Chief Rodriguez's face lit up with professional enthusiasm. Sir, I've been wanting to do something like that for years. We have the range time available, and cross-training always improves performance. As the conversation continued around her, Sarah reflected on the morning's events. What had started as an attempt to humble her had instead opened doors she hadn't even known existed. The SEALs were discussing training schedules and competition opportunities with an enthusiasm that suggested they viewed her as a peer rather than an outsider. Walker approached her as the official conversation wound down. Gunny, I meant what I said about the competition team. We got a match against Army Rangers next month, and honestly, we could use someone with your precision skills. I'd be honored to participate, Sarah replied, meaning every word. The lieutenant smiled and handed her a business card. Give me a call Monday. We'll set up a training schedule that works with your regular duties. As the SEALs finished packing their equipment, several of them made a point of congratulating Sarah on her shooting. Johnson, who had made the popcorn comment earlier, approached with obvious embarrassment. "Gunny, I owe you an apology for that crack about popcorn. I was way out of line." Sarah accepted his apology gracefully, understanding that preconceptions worked both ways. "No harm done. I probably would have thought the same thing in your position." Colonel Bradley waited until the SEALs had departed before speaking with Sarah privately. "Sergeant Shun, I want you to know that what happened here today has given me a lot to think about. Not just about you, but about how we evaluate talent across this base." "I appreciate that, sir. I'm approving your request for regular access to the advanced range," he continued. "In fact, I'm going to recommend you for the base marksmanship instructor program. We need people who can perform at this level teaching others." The offer was more than Sarah had dared hope for when she first requested range access. It represented not just recognition of her abilities, but an opportunity to influence training standards across the entire installation. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." Colonel Bradley smiled, and for the first time in their interactions, it seemed completely genuine. "I don't think that's possible, Gunnery Sergeant." As Sarah walked back to her barracks that afternoon, she carried herself with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had proven doubters wrong through demonstrated excellence rather than empty words. The desert sun felt warm on her face, and the familiar sounds of base life, aircraft overhead, Marines conducting training, vehicles moving between buildings, seemed somehow more welcoming than before. Her phone buzzed with a text from her brother. "How's your day going?" She smiled and typed back, "Just changed a few minds about what Marines can do." That evening, word of Sarah's performance spread through the base with the speed that impressive achievements always traveled in military communities. Marines who had barely known her name suddenly wanted to hear about her shooting techniques. Officers who had dismissed her requests in the past began reconsidering their own assumptions about talent and capability. The base dining facility buzzed with conversations about the morning's events. Sarah found herself surrounded by Marines eager to hear details about the advanced range and the SEAL training session. She answered questions patiently, understanding that her success had significance beyond her own career advancement. Later that night, as Sarah cleaned her personal rifle with the same methodical precision she had demonstrated that morning, she reflected on the day's larger meaning. Excellence, she realized, wasn't about meeting expectations. It was about exceeding them so thoroughly that others had to reconsider what they thought possible. Her roommate, Corporal Martinez, returned from the library with news that the story had reached even the academic side of the base. "The instructor sergeants are talking about your shooting," she said with obvious pride. "They're saying you embarrassed some SEALs." "I didn't embarrass anyone," Sarah corrected gently. "I just showed what's possible when talent gets the right opportunity." The following Monday, Sarah received official orders assigning her as an assistant marksmanship instructor, with authorization to develop training programs for Marines across all skill levels. The position came with increased responsibilities and the opportunity to influence standards throughout the base's shooting programs. More importantly, it represented a shift in how the military evaluated and utilized talent. Sarah's demonstration had proven that excellence could come from unexpected sources, and that assumptions about capability based on appearance or background were not just wrong, but wasteful of human potential. 6 weeks later, Sarah stood on the same advanced range, this time as the primary instructor for a mixed group of Marines, SEALs, and Army Rangers participating in the base's new inter-unit marksmanship program. The program had grown beyond anyone's initial expectations, drawing participants from across the installation and generating interest from other military installations. As she watched students from different branches working together to improve their skills, Sarah felt a deep sense of professional satisfaction. The morning when Colonel Bradley had expected to humble her had instead become the catalyst for changes that benefited the entire base community. Lieutenant Walker, now a regular participant in the cross-training sessions, approached as the day's training concluded. "You know, Gunny, when this all started, I thought we were doing you a favor by letting you train with us. Sarah smiled, checking the electronic scoring system one final time. And now? Now I realize you were doing us the favor. This program has made all of us better shooters. He paused, looking out across the range where Marines and special operations personnel were sharing techniques and comparing notes. Turns out excellence recognizes excellence, regardless of what uniform someone wears. As the sun set over the desert landscape, Sarah packed her equipment with the same care she brought to every aspect of her profession. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove that talent and determination mattered more than preconceptions. The colonel had mocked her range request, expecting her to be humbled by elite operators. Instead, she had shown everyone, including herself, that excellence wasn't about meeting someone else's expectations, but about exceeding what anyone thought possible. In doing so, she had not only earned access to advanced training, but had helped create opportunities for others to discover their own potential. The advanced range was quiet now, except for the wind moving through the desert sage. Sarah took one last look at the facility that had become the site of her vindication and smiled. Sometimes the best way to change minds was simply to be undeniably excellent at what you do.